First of all, as I said in New York, and I will say again on camera, loved this movie. I want to say congratulations. Let's just start with that. The thing that a lot of people won't realize is that this movie has been in development since cinema began in the early 1900s.
It was originally a silent movie, actually.
Right, exactly. But I think it's amazing that this thing finally got made just because of how much time has been put in. Can you sort of talk about the very, very beginning of this and how many actors, it's a who's who of Hollywood that's been attached to this movie?
Well, there's been definitely a lot of actors who were attached, very talented people. And there was also, others that have shown interest but didn't actually formally attach. So, but it has
been a magnet, though.
For sure. It's always attracted very, very talented people on both sides of the camera. It's been very fortunate. It initially came to Atlas via Catherine Bigelow and Mark Boal. While they were in post-production on Hurt Locker, they had an idea for this movie. And Hurt Locker, as you know, was done completely independent. And they wanted to try their hand at making a studio deal. And I was helpful in them setting the project. I was helpful in setting the project up at Paramount. Well, and that was in 2009 or 2000.
It's probably 2009.
2009?
Yeah.
Were you working for me then?
I was actually, the project that I started so long ago, I was an assistant on for you at the time. And when it finally got made, I was a producer on it.
It just precedes the Oscar season where Hurt Locker won all the awards.
Exactly.
Which is forever.
There was no script. There was no script at that time. The script came in after it had won the award.
I'm very curious. Did it ever, in the development process, because if I'm not mistaken, it came close to actually going before,
yes.
And then it didn't. So can you sort of talk about that part of it? Because I think it's fascinating for the history of this movie because it's such an unusual track to get it made.
Well, I think the number of times it almost got made is what makes it so unusual. But really talented people attaching and for whatever reason it not working out and then detaching and others attaching, that's a pretty commonplace thing. But in this situation, back then, we had discussions, with a lot of really great actors who we chatted with. The first real attachment, though, was Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks was attached to play Red Fly.
That version of Red Fly.
That version of Red Fly, yeah. He would play the Red Fly character back when Catherine was going to direct it and Mark, it was Mark's script that he developed with her. We developed together at Paramount.
I'm curious, it's easy, for you guys as a company, what was it about the material? Because I'm sure you see all these scripts that come through and there's all these different possibilities of what you can spend your time on. Mm-hmm. What was it about this material that said that you kept trying to lift it up and get it made?
Because it's a great story, an elevated heist movie that is about something, about guys who have, who have a reason that you can relate to in terms of why they're motivated to pursue this. So it was a smart, elevated, and kind of character-driven heist movie. I think that always attracted us, and we always thought it was worth pushing forward.
Yeah. And also, I think, as Alex said, part of its uniqueness was the fact that when you're dealing with Delta Force guys,
right,
you're dealing with the best of the best, right? In the sense that you've heard of Army Rangers, you've heard of Navy SEALs, you've heard of Green Berets. In order to be a Delta Force, your entryway to possibly being Delta Force is you have to be one of those guys. If you're not one of those guys, and now they have a few women as well, but if you aren't one of that group, you can't even begin to audition for Delta Force. So these are truly the best of the best, and having spent their career being that, the idea that they might use those skills for themselves is an intriguing idea.
I was going to say, through the development process, I would imagine there's many versions of the script. I know JC, when he came on, he tweaked stuff. How was there ever a radically different version of this movie, or was it always about the heist and what comes after?
I think it stayed the same. I mean, Andy,
the essence of the movie has always stayed the same. I think it was
incremental changes over years.
Yeah, and I think the concept of the movie, which essentially is a bunch of characters that have a very special set of skills, and all of a sudden they find themselves in everyday life with no use for those skills. And seeing them be able to sort of use those skills for their own benefit for the first time and see the repercussions of that. I mean, those ideas were always in the script. That was always sort of the essence of the movie from day one.
Yeah. I think what the difference in what Mark wrote and what JC changed or augmented was that the different characters had, may have gone into a slightly different job. Their families or lack of families may be slightly different, but that was more in terms of the character definition than in terms of the plot. But it did inform the plot because obviously character does inform the plot.
And some of the consequences evolved and changed, and locations evolved. What specifics like what Lorea's house looked like and how Lorea was set up. Those kind of things changed over time.
And also where characters end up in the story completely changed.
And Giovanna's character really changed, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a big fan of what Netflix has been doing, and I think that the trajectory of the quality of movies they're making has been on a steady upward stream, including Triple Frontier. Talk a little bit about collaborating with them and just how, I guess, what was that initial, how did it first get to Netflix and how quickly did they jump on it?
Well, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we hit a place at Paramount where it was clear the movie was not going to continue there, and they were having a change of executives, and it just, that happens sometimes, it just wasn't clicking. We looked around at the landscape and looked at where potentially we could continue. Like you said, we weren't going to give up on it, right? We really believed in it. And looked at the potential players, and Netflix emerged from a number of conversations, because there were a number of places interested, as the best place to move forward and keep our momentum going. And the experience was great. I mean, I have to say that from production and continued belief in the movie through, how strong their marketing and publicity was, it was a pretty great experience. They really stood there with us and believed in the movie.
And I think the idea of us looking for a new home for the movie, I think, coincided with, I think it was the same week that Scott Stuber took over the film.
He wasn't even in his office yet.
Yeah, and I remember the email that came from him. I think it wasn't even a Netflix email address at that point, because he hadn't moved officially into his office at Netflix. So it was that early. And it just was perfect timing. He was a fan of JC, he was a fan of the project and what it was, and we found a home really quickly.
I'm always curious with a lot of the studio, like if this was released, let's just arbitrarily say by Warner Brothers, you're going to have test screenings, you might have a focus group, there's certain things that obviously happen. Is it different at Netflix when you're making a movie?
We did the same things.
Yeah. So same process in prepping a movie, same process in what the creative vision that all the department heads have, same process in finishing a movie in terms of testing a film. So really, in terms of doing a tentpole film at a major studio on Netflix, there's no difference
in the making of it. But what is interesting and different is how they evaluate what the product should be. In other words, we did make with Netflix the fully robust, the version of the movie we really and JC really wanted to make, meaning all the bells and whistles and toys to really execute the action, cast it up the way we dreamed about casting it up. And I think how they analyze those decisions is a little bit different than a theatrical studio.
And you also have when you're doing a tentpole-sized film at a studio, you have a release date that you're backing your way into, usually. So that pressure and that time constraint is always sort of sitting in the back of your mind. Sure. With Netflix, I think, we didn't have an exact date in terms of when they were going to release the movie. We knew the window.
We knew they wanted to do it in the first quarter.
Absolutely, yeah. But that pressure of sort of backing your way into a very specific date and rushing to get the movie out there by a certain time, we didn't feel that pressure as much in Netflix as we have before.
I'm always curious about the editing room, because that's the final rewrite. How was it for the editing?
I would say the final mix. is the final rewrite.
Okay, that's very true, but you know what I mean. Like, there's big changes that can happen in the editing room. Were there big changes in the editing room on this film, and how does the test screening scores and what the test screening is telling you, mixed with the analytical data that Netflix provides, how does that alchemy come together in the editing room that might be different than something somewhere else?
That's a great Chuck Roven question.
Honestly, from the standpoint of giving you the analysis of the test screening, it's very, very much similar to what we've all become accustomed to of test screenings, whether they're friends and family screenings or they're recruited screenings with cards with numbers. It's almost exactly the same as was the process with a studio, and we all learn from it. JC, the editors, the guys you're talking to right now, we all learn from that, and we give our opinions, and we all interpret the data, sometimes the same, sometimes differently. But it was extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And and Netflix functioned in very much the same way a really good collaborative studio does.
Yeah. And it did change, of course.
Yeah, I'm curious how things alter in the editing room, because
I mean, honestly, I think we did 1 day of additional photography.
It actually wasn't even 1 day.
Inserts.
We did a half day of insert shoots. Outside of that, no reshoots, no additional photography on this movie.
But you learn things about, like, shape. To me, the thing that changed the most over the editorial process was really the shaping of the characters, right? Because we have good guys doing a bad thing for the wrong reason, and so tracking the empathy or the rootability, right? That was really the tricky part of the editorial process.
And of course, they start out being good guys, thinking they're doing something maybe morally ambiguous, but still ultimately a good thing, because as part of the process, they're going to be taking out a really bad guy.
Right.
And by getting the money for themselves, they're also going to make sure that money doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So for all those reasons, they've talked themselves into they're actually doing a right thing, And so we had to just make sure that came across, so that when they go on this journey, you are actually rooting for them, and then the evolution of the story happens. So I would say the story didn't change hardly at all from the first screening to the last screening. It was clearer and tighter.
I am a big fan of Guy Norris, who was your second unit on this movie.
As are we.
And there's only a few people, I mean, there's a lot of second unit directors, but there's a few big guns. People that have done big spectacles. Guy Norris is one of those people. How tough is it to actually land someone like that? Because I would imagine people on that level are being booked all the time for really big projects.
Well,
it wasn't on this one. It wasn't hardly. I mean, Chuck's known Guy Norris for 30 plus years probably, and
we've all worked with him before.
Guy's a really very close friend of mine. We worked together for the very first time. I met him, in fact, on a film called The Salute of the Jugger or The Blood of Heroes, depending on where the movie was released.
Sure. Well, I mean, by the way, in the United States, it's Edge of Tomorrow or Live, Die, Repeat. Yeah. It happens all the time.
Yes.
So, exactly. So, we bonded in a wonderful way and have been making many movies together since then. So that was in the mid-'80s.
Right, but it's one place where the schedule changes that happened on this movie work to our advantage, because there was an earlier iteration where Guy wasn't available, and then when we shifted the production schedule, he became available. So sometimes there are silver linings.
And I know JC always wanted Guy Norris for the movie, and as Alex said, I think the first version of the movie wasn't available. But I remember when we were doing Suicide Squad and JC came out to meet Guy Norris.
He was very impressed.
And he watched, this incredible action scene and got to know Guy. And Guy's one of those people that he's the best. He's just cool, calm, and collected at all times. You can't rattle that guy, really.
And he's really at his most precise and visionary when he's doing a lot of real live action stunts.
Yeah.
Which is
in-camera stuff.
Which is my part too, because when I spoke to the cast, they all talked about how Guy wanted in-camera effects, practical on set, and I'm curious how that, I don't want to say adds to the production schedule, but how does that all get worked out? Because I would imagine there's certain people that are saying, let's just do this with CGI. We can insert that shot, we can do this, but as an audience member, it always is better with practical. So I'm just curious how that, as producers, how do you weigh that line of what to do in camera and what to add later?
We all wanted, as long as we could do it safely, to do it as much in camera as possible, particularly because we're dealing with, as we said, actors who had conditioned themselves to get as close as they could to the real life thing, and we had real life consultants who actually were the real thing there to help us and to talk with Guy and to talk with the great cat and make sure that they were, ready to exert themselves, and they did, We had very many interesting days where they were working in very practical ways that were very difficult.
High in the mountains, deep in the mud, or jungle, or centipedes, or whatever else was falling
Rain.
out of the
Yeah.
trees.
But that was the other thing, that with doing all of these practical stunts that we did, we got killed with rain in Hawaii. So we weren't just doing them on dirt roads, we were doing them on muddy roads and during rain and slick tide. And so it was sort of like practical stunts in the hardest conditions you could be doing them in. And so we threw everything we could at the environments, threw everything they could at Guy Norris, and he kind of just plowed right through it and still did a great job.
But it's always for me, it's a brilliant blend, right? You start with the practical, it looks like it's practical, and then you do something that is
and then the
movie
CGI
magic
works
of
the best
CGI to just take it to that place that can't possibly be.
I'm almost out of time, but I want to do, I have some individual questions, but I have to do one thing that, because some people in the room might not have seen the movie yet, I'm going to be respectful. One of the things I think is pretty badass about this movie is the third act. How can I say this delicately?
Twist?
There is something that happens in the third act that a lot of people are not going to expect. I think it's a great decision that can only probably happen at like a Netflix, because maybe another studio doesn't let that happen, because I've heard through the grapevine that that person tried to do it before. I'm talking real vague here. What did you talk a little bit about that twist and because I heard it was his idea.
I mean,
or maybe I'm wrong.
We should all speak to it, because we
there
all
was
had,
always a version.
Yeah,
of
there
it.
was always a version where
it?
something like that happened, but not to that particular character.
Exactly.
And I think that because of what the movie's about thematically, and that it is a meditation on greed, right? Because greed is what turns them. Greed is what changes them. The idea that there's a price paid for that is very important to the theme of the movie. You guys can add to that. So I think that informed the impulse, and the actor was game.
We'd cut that scene a bunch of different ways to sort of for maximum efficiency, and I remember at the premiere, there was an audible gasp in the room.
You're gonna give it away, aren't you?
No, I won't. Not giving anything away. But there was an audible gasp in the room, and then people were yelling and screaming at that moment. And I think at that point we all realized that we found the best version of that scene, obviously, because it was a scary scene to cut. I mean, we had a bunch of different versions of it. And
Gotten a lot of feedback from people who've seen it.
Yeah.
You get a lot. The cool thing about Netflix, just to throw it in there, is I've gotten so much feedback so quickly since the movie's been available from people all over the place. People that don't have theaters near them. It's kind of cool.
It's amazing, and I'm sure you have no idea how many people have watched, or have they actually told you?
No, they haven't told us.
No.
Yet.
Yeah, I was going to say
They've told us that they're very happy, but they haven't told us the definition of very happy.
Right.
But it's coming.
Sure. Listen, everyone I know that's worked for Netflix, they all say the same thing. I have no idea. But we look at like the Google trends and see if people are talking about it, but we can't tell. They'll never share the data. So I have a few individual questions. Obviously, I'll start with you. I'm very curious. I've had a theory as to why the Wonder Woman release date happened, the change, and I'm just curious if it has anything to do with China.
It doesn't.
So what can you share? Because originally it was coming out at a point, and then I guess it got pushed back a number of months.
We always wanted the date that we are on right now. The studio felt that until their slate for the year before came together, and they had an amazing end of 18, that they needed to have a big, what I call aircraft carrier,
Sure.
tent pole, in that year. And they, we had a very rushed pre-production because Patty also did television TNT movie Sunday Will Darken. And we had a very rushed post-production schedule in order to make the date that we were on, which was November 1st, 19 this year. And, we were doing it because the studio said they really needed it. And then at a certain point they came to us and they said, you know what, you guys are right. Let's go back to the month that you guys released Wonder Woman 1 in and take the extra time.
Because I've heard, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I've heard recently with China is that they will no longer allow a different version of the movie to play in China. It now has to be the same version that gets released in America.
That's been true for a while.
That's been true for a while.
We faced that on Warcraft. We faced that on a number of other situations.
Oh, because I was wondering if that was something with, because you want to make the film done to have like a day and date with China.
The issue with China is
Blackout period.
Well, there's a blackout period, and normally a lot of that has to do with Chinese New Year and things like that. So there's that. The blackout periods have gotten less. It is making sure it's the same movie. There used to be a little bit more latitude. Now they really want it to be exactly the same movie, and that means you have to finalize it that way before you show it to them, and the screening period for them gets longer and longer, where they screen and then tell you that it can come in and date you. All of those things are true. That wasn't the reason for the push.
Yeah, but so my question is now with the June release date, I believe it's June, that allows maybe more of a chance of a day and date around the world with that release date.
Well, that is true. That is true.
Yeah.
And that is a positive thing. It's an additional positive outcome.
Sure. I'm gonna push a little further because I'm already out of time. But so I want to know what's going on with Uncharted.
We're working on it.
Right. Because you signed a cool director. I'm a big fan of Dan. Do you think it can be in front of cameras this year?
There's a shot.
There's a shot. We're working. We're trying for that.
Okay.
We're definitely trying for that.
Right. It's I'm so curious about this movie because it's another one of these that's been in.
Oh yeah. Thanks for reminding us.
Yeah, I'm just throwing. Hey, I'm just throwing it out there.
We are as passionate about getting Uncharted made as we were about Triple Frontier, and I really believe we will succeed. And I think the studio is completely on board. We have the right filmmaker, and we're working our asses off to get it there.
Joe Carnahan, I believe, wrote a version of the script. I think. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've had a number of talented writers.
I was going to say, so is it still being worked on in terms of scripting? Is this someone you can share that's writing it?
We're still working with Dan in terms of script adjustments, but but it's a newer version of the script than the one you're referencing.
I know exactly.
No,
what
it's a
you're saying.
completely different version.
Yes.
It was a
One minute. I want to know if what's going on with the Shane Black project that I believe you're working on.
The Destroyer.
Yes.
We're working on the script with Sony. It's a project that Chuck and I have been working on for a very, very long time. It's based on one of our favorite book series, and we're just working on the script. We got to get it right.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Shane, and I need him to make more movies.
He's a talented guy.
That's what I have. I got to hit stop, and I will just say congratulations on Triple Frontier.
Thanks for coming on.